Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the GreenNY Sustainability Series of webinars. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us today, and thank you for being here in August, a time that's usually pretty slow. But we've got really good attendance today. It's a really good topic, and I'm excited for it. And this is an area that we haven't focused a lot on before, but I think there's a growing consensus that this is a large issue that needs to be tackled, so I'm really excited for today's presentation. A couple housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and it'll be placed on the GreenNY website afterwards. It'll probably be up there in about a week, so if you have colleagues that couldn't make it, you want to go back and see something on the slides, feel free to go and see it there on the GreenNY website. We will take questions at the end of the webinar, so please type them into the chat box and we'll get to them at the end. We'll read them off and make sure that they're all answered. Our next webinar is going to be on Thursday, September 10th at noon, and it is on electric vehicle technology. We'll be covering both the basics and tech updates, so even if you know quite a bit about them, we'll be covering the latest developments and what's coming down the pike, and we've got a great presenter from NYPA there. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our presenters today. We have Kayla Montani and Amy Bloomfield from the DEC Recycling Unit, and we have a special guest today. We have Dan Lilkus Rain, Dan, is joining us. Dan has worked on the development of Re-Clothe NY campaign that's run by NYSAR that helps New Yorkers reduce textile waste going to landfill. He's also a board member of the New York State Association for Reduction, Reuse, and Recycling, and he is the recycling coordinator for the town of Bethlehem in New York. As opposed to our neighbors to the south in Pennsylvania there. I think we've got the better Bethlehem. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to them. So let's get started.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Amy Bloomfield. And I just want to get started by saying that everyone should be wearing clothes right now, unless you're in a really different work environment or you happen to be tuning in from home. And I just want to mention this because everyone wears clothes, which means everyone can participate in a more sustainable world through simple, everyday actions like just getting dressed in the morning. We have the agenda up here. We're just going to run through a little background about textiles and a little bit about innovation that's going on. And then we'll get into waste reduction and recycling, and also how you can take action. And then we'll have a little bit of Q&A. Kayla, are you there? Okay, I think we're having some technical difficulties on Kayla's line, so I'll just jump in and...
Kayla, can you hear this?
Yes, I can. I think maybe you guys had me muted.
Okay.
Yeah, somehow they got clicked back on. We're good to go.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So, hi everybody, this is Kayla, and like Amy said, clothing and textiles are a big part of everybody's lives, and so textiles, what are they? So Brendan, if you could go to the next slide. So textiles, what are they? So examples such as rugs, clothing, shoes, your sheets on your bed, car seat upholstery, belts, ties, purses, undergarments. There are so many things that are considered textiles. And actually, believe it or not, the fashion industry has a larger carbon footprint than the airline industry's carbon footprint. And 20% of all global industrial water pollution comes from the textile industry, from things such as textile treatment and dyeing. And I'm actually going to pass it over to Dan next.
Good afternoon. This is Dan Lilkus Rain, and I wanted to talk to you about the fact that textiles are really resource intensive. Just to give you an example, you can see on the slide here that one pair of jeans, for example, it's estimated that they consume about 2,900 gallons, almost 3,000 gallons of water used over the life cycle. And that includes everything from the growing cotton in the first place, the harvesting, the producing, the garment, the dyeing, the washings that are going to take place over the life cycle, that's a lot of water for one pair of pants. And so if we take the UN's estimate for how many liters of water, clean water, every person on the planet should have access to for drinking, but also bathing, doing dishes, that sort of thing, that's 20 liters of clean water a day. So connecting the two, we're looking at about 550 people's water needs for an entire day that are going to be saved if you're reusing a pair of jeans rather than causing a new pair to be produced.
And so, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dan.
No, that's fine.
And so going off of that, so the water usage when it comes to textiles is extremely important to consider. And then, but also we need to consider ourselves. So the problem isn't just with companies, it's also with consumer behavior, and consumers need to be accountable as well. So an average American throws away approximately 70 pounds of used clothing per year. And 15% of clothing used by consumers is recycled, whereas manufacturers recycle 75% of their used clothing. And some of the problems with this is related to fast fashion, and Amy's going to talk to you a little bit about that.
Thanks, Kayla. So you've probably heard the term fast fashion. It basically means inexpensive clothing that's been produced rapidly by mass market retailers in response to the latest trends. So that's kind of the technical definition, but it basically means really cheaply made clothing that kind of epitomizes the latest fashion trends, and it sort of promotes the idea of recreational shopping and this need to keep buying more and stay on with the latest trends. And so it's actually sort of a business model, and it's a strategy to get consumers to buy more and spend more. And so when it comes to fast fashion, we actually purchase today 60% more clothing than we did in the year 2000. And we're keeping our garments half as long. So that means we're actually purchasing more and more clothing and keeping it for less amount of time. And also half of the fast fashion trends, they actually get thrown away within a year. So we're sort of led to believe that getting clothing at good deals and really cheap prices is a good thing, but in reality we may actually be spending less money and reducing our environmental impact if we kind of invest in more timeless and high quality goods that will last a little longer. And when it comes to fast fashion, we sort of even feel like a social pressure that's put on by brands and the fashion industry, and this need to buy the latest trends, or the need to fit in or feel good about ourselves. So there's also a social pressure when it comes to fast fashion. And so fast fashion, it's kind of like fast food. It's cheap and it makes us feel good in the short run, but the cheap prices and trends actually come at a hidden price for people and the environment. And so when it comes to sustainability, we talk a lot about the environment, but social issues are also included in sustainability. And so it's important to think about that 90% of our clothing and 98% of footwear is actually imported from overseas, where oftentimes they don't have the same fair working conditions that we enjoy here in the U.S. And sometimes the factory workers are forced to work 14 to 16-hour days, 7 days a week, sometimes in cramped and dangerous conditions for little pay that doesn't even cover their basic necessities for living a decent life. Also, 80% of the apparel is made by young women aged 18 to 24, and they can also face challenges with finding childcare, being able to go on maternity leave, or even sexual harassment. So this is why Governor Cuomo actually created New York's Apparel Industry Task Force. So in New York, we have this task force. They developed a guide with the New York State Department of Labor, and it's a guide to help businesses in New York identify and avoid sweatshops when purchasing apparel and seeking contracts, because we know that these sweatshops have a huge competitive advantage. It comes at the cost of the environment and the social well-being of people. So we encourage you to look at the tags on your clothing and research a company's working practices, and just kind of look into it and make yourself a little more aware. So now that we've got the doom and gloom out of the way, we promise that there's some really exciting things happening when it comes to textiles. And so the opposite of fast fashion is actually slow fashion, and it's sort of like the slow food movement. So slow fashion means that companies are taking sustainability into account. They're taking quality, the environment, and fairness for both consumers and workers into account. So we do know that achieving a new textiles economy is going to demand a kind of a new level of collaboration that we haven't really seen before, but we're starting to see a lot of it now. And there are a lot of brands and organizations doing really exciting things. And we can't really call out specific brands on the webinar today, and we don't have a lot of time, but if you want to email us after the webinar, we can provide additional information. But just a couple of the things that we're seeing as far as innovation in the textile industry. They're starting to use recycled content in their clothing, bags, and home goods. They're starting to choose sustainable fibers and fair trade factories. We're seeing the offering of repair services or even refurbishing gently used clothing for resale. There's also clothing rental services popping up beyond kind of the traditional tuxedos and ball gowns. So clothing rental and subscription services as kind of part of the sharing economy. And we're also seeing some businesses starting to offer textile recycling right in their stores. So you can bring things in while you're shopping to have your textiles recycled. And there's a big list, and we could go on for a long time, but we just want to let you know that there's a lot going on to tackle this issue. There are people thinking about it. There are all kinds of online platforms appearing, and people making textile recycling more accessible and easy to find places, and webinars like this that are helping to educate people about the issues. And down on the bottom, there's just a couple of hashtags if you want to follow on social media to learn more about sustainable fashion, and we especially like that UN Fashion Alliance has a lot of good information. And Kayla, are you there?
I think we might have lost Kayla. Yeah, I don't see her.
Okay. Well, Kayla is having some technical difficulties, so let me just see where we left off. And so Kayla was going to talk a little bit about what you can do to reduce textile waste. So some of the things that you can do is practice conscious consumerism, which means just thinking before you buy, and actually think, do you need this, and what is it made of, where did it come from, and start asking some simple questions like that. You can also buy more durable goods, and like we talked about before, you may find that you actually are saving money, even though it's a little bit more upfront, but you won't be participating as much in kind of the fast fashion craze, like fast food fashion craze that we talked about. There's also a lot of apps popping up that let you know the environmental impacts of the brands that you're wearing. So there are a lot of ways that what you're wearing and the brands that you support, that you can find out actually where it's coming from and how the workers are treated and any environmental initiatives they may be involved in. You can actually visit a repair cafe, and we encourage you to go to repaircafe.org if you don't know what a repair cafe is. It's basically a community space where you can come have things repaired for free, and you can also learn. They also teach you how to repair things. So you could attend a repair cafe and learn how to mend your clothes and fix your clothes instead of tossing them, but we hope you would recycle them at the end of their useful life. You could also try going to thrift stores or even host clothing swaps with friends. And so we touched a little bit on what kind of items are eligible for recycling. And Kayla touched on that a little bit in the beginning, but it's not just clothing, and Dan's going to talk a little more about this as well. But a lot of clothing recycling programs, so there's donation programs and recycling programs. But some of the programs that offer recycling, they'll even take things like shoes, including heels, sandals, even boots or winter boots, of course any kind of clothing, sweaters, outerwear, jackets, and then of course your jeans and any of your bottoms. They'll even take backpacks and duffel bags, belts and gloves, and also sheets and blankets, even napkins or Halloween costumes. So it goes beyond the clothing that we wear, and Dan will talk a little bit more about that.
And I just want to see here quick, Kayla, are you on again?
Yes, I am.
Okay, awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy, for handling that.
So you might be wondering where you can donate or recycle your clothing and other textiles. And you can see on the slide, or maybe not, there's a slide that has a lot of pictures of bins, and there it is. Clothing donation bins that you see all over New York State and probably other communities around the country as well are a really good place to start. A lot of people don't realize that they accept not just clothing, but that whole laundry list that Amy was just reading. And I'm going to talk in a little bit about what actually happens to that, and the fact that this material is not just, you should not just donate that which is perfectly good condition for reusable materials that you can rewear, but also it will end up being recycled, that which is not reusable. So as far as where can you recycle and donate textiles, you can start with the bins, and some of the companies, organizations actually have sheds instead of bins, but that type of portable location throughout the community. Of course, thrift stores and consignment shops. Collection events. A lot of municipalities, including the town of Bethlehem, have a couple of collection events a year, usually around Earth Day and America Recycles Day, so in the spring and the fall. And that's a great time, even though there are these opportunities throughout the year, it's a more fun, community-minded way to donate clothing and other textiles. Of course, you don't have to just donate. You can sell things, Craigslist, garage sales. You can host a collection for a charity or for a special group at your home or school or office, such as, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar, but the University of Albany actually has a Cinderella project where they collect prom dresses from their college students to donate to needy young women in the community that need, in high school, that need prom dresses. I also know programs for collecting business attire for low-income job seekers, swimwear for kids in the city that may not be able to afford new swimsuits, and that sort of thing. So I would encourage everybody to consider hosting something like that in their office, or if they're involved with their children's school, or even at your home. All right, so this is where it gets interesting. A lot of people don't realize this, but only 10 to 20% of the clothing that you donate, whether it's in these bins for the most part, or charities, or there are some for-profit clothing collection companies as well, which really serve an important purpose because they're able to reach areas that there may not be a charity that's active to be able to make donations possible. So only about 10 to 20% of the donated clothing and other textiles is going to end up being sold at a thrift store. That's going to leave about 80% plus that is then going to be usually sold to a salvage company, a recycling company, where they're going to sort it. You can see the picture of the folks sorting stuff on the line. And about 45% of that, the next kind of highest value purpose after the thrift store, is going to be secondhand clothing. And that, the majority of that is really exported overseas. Sometimes people think of that, it kind of has a bad rap. Oh, we're sending our used clothing to Africa or other places. Well, as far as my understanding, the reality of it is that it ends up being used by people who need the clothing. And it may be sold in these other countries, but it's sold at a very low cost compared to trying to purchase a new garment in their country, or especially in the United States. So the majority of that, which is not sold at the thrift store, is going to actually be on the world secondhand used clothing market. And the majority of that is overseas. And then you're left with about 50% total, which 30% is recycled converted into wiping rags. I work at the town of Bethlehem Highway Garage, for example, and we get these big bags every month with rags made from, you can tell they're from all different colored t-shirts and sweatshirts and occasionally undergarments and all kinds of crazy things. Cotton is going to be the highest value material for that. So cotton t-shirts and sweatshirts will often be made into wiping rags. But it's not just for auto garages and kind of dirty things like that. A lot of industry uses premium wipers that are made from only white cotton and so forth. They have different standards for different wiping rag industries. And then you're going to have 20%, which is really not suitable for reuse in any of these ways. It's going to be recycled into fiber. It's called shoddy. It's what, if you ever looked at the back of a carpet pad, it's usually multicolor material. It's going to be put in pet beds. It's going to be 3 to 4 pounds, I believe, in every automobile as insulation, for sound insulation in the walls of the automobile. It's used for home insulation. You've sometimes seen blue jeans made into that. So only 5% is going to end up as waste after all of this. That's usually synthetic fibers that just aren't able to be reused or recycled, things that are contaminated with paint or oil. They even are able to reclaim most of the snaps and zippers and the metal parts of these garments and other textiles. So that is the story of what happens to it.
And so as we're talking about recycling textiles, we just want to make sure that everyone is aware that although textiles and clothing and all of that are recyclable, they really need separate recycling programs like Dan was mentioning. They shouldn't be going in your household recycling bin or in your curbside recycling toter. They really need these special separate programs. And in the image on the lower right-hand side of your screen, you can kind of see that's some recycling facility equipment that's made to handle, plastic, metal, glass, and paper. And you can see some textiles in there. It looks like there's a sweater or something. and it's wound around the equipment. And so if you put textiles in your household recycling, it can cause these dangerous and expensive jams. The workers have to remove the jams and they can become injured, and it really contaminates the recycling stream. So we just want to make sure that everyone is aware that textiles don't belong in your household recycling bin. And DEC has a whole program called Recycle Right New York. It's a campaign that we've been running, and we provide free resources for people about proper recycling habits. So there's a couple examples on the screen of some resources that are available if you want to use them in your workplace. They can be used in schools or anywhere that you want to educate about how to properly recycle certain materials. So it goes beyond the textile message, but we included those in the webinar today. And that's just another example of something you can find in the Recycle Right New York campaign, and there's the link if you want to visit it. And this is being recorded if you need to get a second look at that, or if you just type Recycle Right New York into a search engine, you should be able to bring it up.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Re-Clothe New York. It's a statewide campaign that was launched in 2014. It's a partnership between NYSAR3, the New York State Association for Reduction, Reuse, and Recycling, SMART, Trade Industry Group, which is Secondary Materials and Recycled Textiles, and the Council for Textile Recycling, nonprofit arm of the Trade Industry Group. Also, it's been supported with some generous grant funding from the Pollution Prevention Institute. It was New York's first statewide effort to target a specific category of recyclable material and to address the 1.4 billion pounds, that's with a B, capital B, of textiles discarded each year in New York State, with an estimated potential of at least $200 million that is lost when they get trashed in the landfill. Why did we focus on textiles rather than something else for Re-Clothe New York? First of all, it's what I call a forgotten recyclable. Most people know to donate reusable, re-wearable clothing in good condition, but they don't realize, as I mentioned, all these other things that can be done with them that can actually be recycled, even if they are ripped, stained, worn, torn, missing zippers, snaps, buttons, etc. And it comprises at least 5% of the waste stream. Only about 15% of the textiles are currently recovered, and the rest are going to end up in the landfill, sadly. So consider it low-hanging fruit as far as recovery rates. There's already also what we call a robust reverse supply chain in existence. These bins and sheds for collecting clothing and textiles, the thrift stores, they exist throughout the country as well as the state of New York, obviously. They're already there. It's not like organics or other materials that we've gotten away from the infrastructure over the years and have to kind of rebuild that infrastructure. It's already in existence and can handle a lot more of the clothing donations for reuse and recycling. And it has significant economic and environmental impacts. We already talked about some of the climate change impacts and the water and other resource impacts, and I mentioned economic impacts as well. The campaign was launched in November 2014 and has already seen some success. For example, we're estimating just in the first month alone about 178 million unique online impressions with a public information campaign, and several million pounds of clothing and textiles that have been recovered. But it's hard to track exactly how much, but it's mostly a public information campaign. The campaign also received a 2015 EPA Environmental Champion Award. Now, it's by no means our work is done. A lot of people still don't realize that clothing and textiles are not trash, even if you're done with them, even if they're not wearable. So we need to, our work goes on. You can visit nytextiles.org There are a lot of resources there, including a widget where you can put in your zip code and find the nearest clothing donation location that happens to be identified by the campaign, at least in your area. There are a lot of others that are not on there yet, so the work continues with that. And you can also check out nicer3.org, which hosts the Re-Clothe NY website. There are a lot of resources on there. Unfortunately, some of the media and PR resources that are on there, the links are not working at the moment. We're working on that, but there are a lot of resources that are active on there that you can check out.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. And in addition to the Re-Clothe NY campaign that you can get involved with and all of the other ideas that we mentioned and the Recycle Right New York campaign, some other fun ways to dive into action. So we had mentioned about, just rethinking your choices. We can all be conscious consumers, so we can all think about, do we need that? Where is it coming from? How is it made? What is it made from? One of the things you can look for are textiles made from post-consumer recycled content, and also some textiles are made from factory scraps. That's another great option to look for. So as I mentioned, you can get involved with Recycle Right New York. If you are downstate in the New York City area, so DSNY, the Department of Sanitation of New York City, they have a fantastic program, Donate NYC, and that is linked on the slide. That is a fantastic option to look into. We can all celebrate textiles, recycling and reducing and reusing by participating in National Thrift Store Day on August 17th, so that is fast approaching. There are also some online consignment stores. As Amy mentioned, we can't name specific brands or anything, but that is something really interesting to check out. And, as I mentioned, I just want to stress again that we can all be conscious consumers, and it's, okay to stop and think about your choices and, do I really need that right now? And, it's important, too, to think about buying items that are durable and something that will last, and that's another way that we can make sure that we're being conscious consumers. And we have one last fun slide to end this on. So you can also dive into action. We've got our puppy and our flamingo here. So some sandals, I just put this in for fun. We put it in for a fun thing to end on. So actually some sandals can be put in textiles recycling bins, and then clean and dry swim trunks too. And so thank you everybody for participating and listening. And here's our contact information, and we're happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was an absolutely fantastic presentation. I know I learned a lot here. So just a couple thoughts. We've got a number of really good questions that have come in. I think one of the good things that was highlighted here is kind of the nexus of waste and climate. So when we're talking about climate change, a lot of times the focus is really on energy emissions or transportation emissions, but really the amount of waste we're generating significantly impacts climate emissions, and especially when you're moving things back and forth across oceans and things like that. So, if you're trying to take action to lower your carbon footprint, we've got some really good tips here today. And I really like the fact that Amy brought up some of the social concerns about the fashion industry, because sustainability is not just environmental sustainability, even though we focus on that. It really is also social and economic sustainability as well for the people involved in all of these industries. So I think that's something to think about as well going forward. And when we're talking about making things or buying things that last longer, it's not just fashion. When you're thinking of sports equipment, or you're thinking of furniture. I don't know if fast furniture is a term, but I know there's a lot of stuff out there you get from stores these days that you might be swearing the entire time you're trying to put it together that might not last that long. And if you're moving quite a bit, or you're younger and you're moving around, maybe it's worth it to invest in something that will last 30 years, that you can take with you and isn't going to break when you move. So one question I've got right off the bat for you, and this is one that I ask everybody who comes on our webinars here, are there any kind of third-party certifications kind of across brands that you can look for in terms of recycled content or fair working conditions, or how the quality of the item is?
Unfortunately, not that I'm aware of. I don't know if Amy's come across any, or Kayla in their research.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any either. There may be something out there. I think if you visit that UN Fashion Alliance initiative, that they would have information about that.
The Council for Textile Recovery, one of the partners in the Re-Clothe NY campaign, actually does some, they chose to work with a couple of nonprofit organizations that they vetted, that they feel that are being very environmentally responsible. So that's one avenue as far as a vetting certification process for charities, but I don't know of any for-profit companies.
Mm-hmm. So another question here: with more and more clothing rental places coming up and being established, is there anywhere where people can look for kind of where they can find those in their community? Is there any resource for who serves what areas?
Yeah, not that I know of. It's hard because we can't mention specific brands on this webinar, but definitely something to search, that there's a lot of new and innovative kind of clothing rental and clothing subscription services where you can basically get clothing and then return it. You can even get clothing in the mail and use it and then return it and get clothes to try out. I'm not aware of any kind of platform that says where all of these are found in communities. I know New York City, Donate NYC and Grow NYC have some really good resources for finding things like that.
So Tom Haverford was an environmental trendsetter. Okay. Throwing out the Parks and Rec reference there.
Oh, yeah, with his rental.
Rent-a-swag, yeah.
Rent-a-swag.
Rent-a-swag, he was ahead of his time.
Sounds like he still is.
Yeah. So we've just got a shout-out here for saying it's great that now people are learning more about how they can throw things in the bin more than just clothing that can be donated. So a shout out here also for the organization Dress for Success in letting people know that they take gently used clothing for women in the workplace. So that's another outlet for things. I know that I recently donated some old suits to the Refugee Center in Utica. So if you do have clothing, there's a lot of social justice organizations out there that work with new immigrant communities and others to get dress clothes to folks for interviews and stuff like that. So that's another place to look for kind of more high-end clothing that you might be looking to get rid of. So another question here: does Goodwill take shred and recycled fiber in the ARC state?
I don't believe Goodwill takes recycled fiber in that condition that I'm aware of, but you'll have to check out their website to be certain, but they take quite a laundry list, even more than what we listed compared to a lot of other organizations. Pretty impressive what they will accept. And we're not talking brand specific today, but there are a couple, there is a large online retailer in particular that is partnered with Goodwill, that if you get one of their boxes and you can refill it with clothing and textiles as well as other household goods. It's called Give Back Box, and you can send that back postage free to Goodwill for donation.
That's fantastic. So the next question here, what can you do with old, possibly smelly sneakers? I will edit this question to what can you do with smelly sneakers, because as a runner I have plenty of those.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kayla.
Oh, no, that's okay. Go ahead, Dan, and I can add on to it.
I was just going to say that Nike at least used to have a program where they would take the soles of sneakers and make them into playground topping, for lack of a better word, surface. But old sneakers, even if they're smelly, as long as they're reasonably wearable and you have both both of them together especially, can be donated. And even if something that you consider unwearable, somebody who is in a different circumstance in life might be glad to get your old smelly sneakers. Maybe they'll be able to clean them well before using them.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So the next question, go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned a program that we have tried out before here at our office for both our Earth Day and New York Recycles Day events. So there's a program called Got Sneakers, and twice a year we are able to collect people's sneakers in the building and able to send them off for recycling. And that program, again, is called Got Sneakers. It's gotsneakers.com if people would like to check it out.
Awesome. So, Kayla, would that be something that I think we have quite a few sustainability coordinators from other agencies on the line here that they might be able to do as like an Earth Day or America Recycles Day event at their facilities?
Yep, it's really easy, and you contact the company. I won't go into it in great detail, but you go to their website, contact the company. They send you the sneaker bags. You fill them up and send them back.
Fantastic. So,
Brendan, I wanted to mention something that I forgot before, please. Everybody knows that traditional recyclables, plastics in particular, as well as mixed paper, are in kind of crisis in the United States based on trade policies, et cetera. But that's one of the things that's really exciting about recovery of textiles is that the markets have stayed really strong for reuse and recycling of textiles. Town of Bethlehem, for example, partners with a clothing collection company, and the proceeds are shared with the Town of Bethlehem for the bins that we have on town property. We only have 7 bins on town property right now, for example, and we're able to have $8,000 to $10,000 a year in revenue just from those bins. That's not even including our twice annual clothing textile collection events, which actually benefit the school district and the food pantry in Bethlehem. So it's when municipalities are searching for ways to help fill in the revenue gaps for other recyclables, clothing and textiles is really a savior in that regard, at least right now. And there are peaks and valleys in the clothing textile markets over the years, like anything, but it has not been nearly as upside down as the markets are right now for other recyclables.
That's a really good point. So the next question we have here, I see collection bins from many different organizations around town. Do most of these recycle items that will not be donated or sold at their thrift shop?
Yeah, most of them follow that same infographic of what happens to your donated items. They're not going to advertise on the bins necessarily because what they want is a higher value, reusable, wearable clothing, but again, only 10 or 20% of that's going to actually be sold or donated in the community, and the rest is either going to be enter the world secondhand clothing market or is going to be recycled into wiping rags or fiber for other uses. So I would encourage people to donate even stuff that is not wearable, as long as it's not contaminated or wet.
And then if people look up the Re-Clothe New York campaign, and there's that locator where you can type in your zip code and it tells you the closest donation or recycling locations. Will that tell people what items the places accept?
Yeah, the places listed, which are a mixture of nonprofit and for-profit clothing and textile collection organizations, listed on the Re-Clothe New York website at nytextiles.org. There is a separate page on there which has the complete list. All of them have agreed to accept those materials that are on that list, which includes everything that was already listed, as well as fabric scraps of a foot dimensions or larger and that sort of thing. But it's mostly what has already been mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So next question here. What are leather shoes and footwear like sneakers and sandals used for? It seems like they would need deconstruction to be processed into something else. How is leather retrieved in mass from footwear?
I think primarily they're reused for reuse as footwear. If it's completely deconstructed, if it's already demolished, I'm not sure, honestly, what the recovery process is for that. There may be some in other countries. There may be some innovation for that. I'm not aware of anybody in this country that's taking leather footwear apart and recycling that in other ways. But there are a million new innovations happening. Part of our world secondhand used clothing market innovation is not just taking and reselling or donating T-shirts in other nations from the United States as is, but they actually have a whole cottage industries where they're going to be getting out the sewing machine and refashioning them into more local fashion trends, or repairing them, et cetera. So there's possibility that there's something happening like that for leather footwear, but for the most part, it's going to be reworn as much as possible as footwear.
Mm-hmm. So next question. I saw that cotton requires a lot of water to grow, harvest, etc., but is it still a better alternative to nylon plastic-based fabrics? A lot of fibers enter the waterway through the washing machine, so I feel like we're stuck between two evils.
I feel the same way. It's basically, it depends on what's quote-unquote better as far as what your goals are. If your goals are to reduce the amount of plastic that you're using and you're concerned about microplastic or microfibers, you might go for cotton as a way to reduce your plastic. And if you use cotton, there's a certain number of times that you use it to see the environmental benefit. But let's say, for example, maybe you're really concerned about climate change. And maybe you could find something made out of recycled synthetic fibers that might have a better climate change benefit than the climate costs of growing and transporting and farming cotton. So you might go for that. So there's no solution when it comes to, is this better than that? It's not a one-size-fits-all. I think it kind of depends on what your personal goals are, and you shouldn't drive yourself crazy trying to figure out what the best thing is. It's really complex and complicated. There are people that work on that. They're called life cycle assessments or life cycle analysis. And so those people are really high-level technical and scientific people, and they spend a lot of time driving themselves crazy with those questions. So I would encourage you to think about what your goals are and choose what you want to do based on that.
I think that's excellent, Amy, and I wanted to add to that whatever you choose, make sure it's a very durable garment, because you can get a fast fashion garment made with either synthetic or cotton that's going to kind of negate the even bothering to try to figure out which is better for the environment if it doesn't last more than a few months or a year or two, versus something that's very durable. One of the things that I like about the cotton as a choice is the fact that it is compostable. It is, I've actually used denim as a ground cover in gardens, weed barriers. And it also, as I mentioned in what happens to stuff when we donate it, it's useful as insulation, as wiping rags, as all sorts of things, as well as re-wearing by other people. Synthetics are not, at the very moment, at least the technology isn't there where the synthetics are nearly as recyclable as the cotton.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that the durability question brings up another one here, is when people are selecting clothing, there's certain colors that tend to stain or show stains easier than others. Would it be considered more sustainable to buy clothes that might not show stains as much, such as a darker color as opposed to a lighter one?
Sustainable?
Yeah.
Sorry, couldn't resist. Dad jokes here.
I like it.
I would think it would be. I mean, if you're going to wear a white shirt, you're not going to be able to wear it as long unless you tie-dye it eventually once it's really stained as something that's a darker color that's not going to show stains as well.
Although there are a lot of environmental concerns when it comes to dyes. I don't know a lot about it, but that's something to look into as well.
Good question.
So marinara is the enemy of the sustainable when it comes to the fashion world. Okay, so the next question here is a little bit complex. So this person they rent clothing currently, but a lot of the companies have shipping and packaging because you're shipping it back and forth since they don't have local branches. Do you know of any organizations or companies out there that folks could search for that have local branches or that are dealing with the amount of shipping emissions involved in clothing rental?
So I would say, since it's difficult for us in terms of not, we can't mention any brands. One thing that I wanted to mention before is that it's great to look for a certified B corporation. So a lot of times corporations, companies that are that have that type of certification, or in my experience, this is just maybe been my personal experience, but they do have, greener options in terms of the packaging that they use, how much plastic and paper and cardboard comes with everything. And then I've also found in my experience that those companies have more items that contain post-consumer recycled content. So that would be my suggestion, was to look for those types of companies.
Mm-hmm.
Kayla, can you explain what a certified B corporation is?
So from what I know about it, companies have to go through an evaluation in terms of their sustainability practices and in order to earn that certification.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically, I think, an audit that the companies go through in order to earn that type of certification.
And that's a multi-attribute certification as well, I believe, that takes into account economic and social aspects of the company as well.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks, Brendan.
Mm-hmm. So next question here. We've got a lot of them today, which is fantastic. When selecting clothing, what materials are the least environmentally friendly? Anything to avoid?
I think that goes back to what Amy and Dan were mentioning. It really depends on your personal goals and what you're looking to accomplish. And a great thing to do is, if you really want to know, if you want to look at things and analyze different fabrics, is to check out the different life cycle analysis evaluations that are available online. And I think, Amy, is that available through the UN resources that you mentioned?
It may be.
And one thing that, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
One thing that I did want to mention is, like Amy said, we don't want anyone to just go, drive themselves crazy over one thing, trying to choose the best thing over the other thing. Another great thing to try to do is to buy clothing that is multi-purpose. So if you need something new for work, is that an item that you could wear somewhere else? Is it more than just an office type item? I guess it depends on the type of job that you have. But say, for example, I'm just going to use myself today. So I have on a shirt from a certified B corporation. It's made from recycled water bottles, and I can wear it paddleboarding, or I can wear it to the office. So it's just another thing that you can keep in mind. And if you are worried about plastics and microplastics, there are bags that you can purchase, and you can put your laundry in them, so they help capture the plastics when you're washing your clothes.
That's fantastic. And Kayla, have you ever thought of commuting by paddleboard? You can just run out of the building and get right on the hub.
I would love that.
So we got a couple of shout-outs here in the next comments that we've gotten. One is for local city missions. They a lot of times have donation bins, and for here, the person is saying that the Albany City Mission gives away usable stuff, sells some of the less usable stuff for fiber content, and then they use the money for that for heating their facility, which is kind of an all-around win, and it gets back to what Dan was mentioning earlier with the town of Bethlehem getting some revenue from this as well. We also have a shout out, if you have not heard of the group, if you're located in the Albany area, Green Drinks Albany, they host networking events for sustainability and environmental professionals. Their next event is going to be on September 10th in Troy at a facility that works in recycling fabric and turning it into new items for sale. So that's something to look forward to. The group is Green Drinks Albany. They hold a lot of great networking events if you're involved and want to get more involved in environmental actions. And just to let you know, it is free. Those events are free as well. Next comment here is a shout out for hemp as a material. Do you guys have any thoughts on that now that that's a growing market segment?
Well, to my understanding, hemp is a fast-growing natural fiber that saves resources compared to cotton or other natural fibers. It's certainly durable in my limited experience. I haven't had a lot of hemp clothing, but the couple of garments that I have owned that are hemp are very durable. The main thing that I would be conscious of in my personal experience is that it seems to shrink even more easily than cotton, but that may have been just something that I did wrong.
Yeah, I think that sums it up well. I've heard similar, that it may use less resources, it's fast growing, and could be a good sustainable alternative.
So we've got a water-based question here, because we did get into the how thirsty jeans are slide. So how do you address the common question of how will saving water in a water-rich state like New York help water-poor areas in other parts of the world?
Well, I mean, I think right now we're water-rich, and we're really lucky that in New York we have a lot of water resources, and not even going around the world, but in the U.S. there's places that are facing droughts. So we're really lucky in New York right now to have plentiful water resources. So I think in order to keep it that way, we should get ahead of the game and think about ways that we can continue to conserve water.
And please keep in mind that the water cycle is global, and everyone lives downstream from everybody else pretty much. I mean, we can almost see the Hudson from this beautiful conference room here, and if we're talking about water pollution, whether it's in the river, which is going to make its way to the ocean and therefore around the world, or through the airborne part of the water cycle, it's going to affect everybody, not just a water-rich state like New York.
Yeah, like we were talking about, 97 and 98% of clothing comes from overseas, so even though it doesn't feel like you're having an effect in the way that you purchase your clothes on a global scale, that it really does.
Great point.
Mm-hmm. So the last question we have here, and if anybody else does have more questions, feel free to type them into the chat box here. We are bumping up against our time limit here, though. Is it okay to put pieces of T-shirts from which the design has been cut out into a clothing recycling bin?
Yes. It's my understanding, especially if most of the T-shirt is there, you're not going to want to put small scraps of T-shirts in there. There are companies and organizations. There's one in particular, a company based in New York City that started a couple years ago that deals with, can handle that sort of thing anonymously as far as keeping brand or proprietary stuff out of it. I'm not allowed to say brand specific companies, but it has to do with fabric scraps, so I'll give you that hint. But another thing to do, instead of just donating that, would be to consider just cutting it into wiping rags for yourself. You know, everybody needs rags to clean up around the house, or compost it if it's cotton. That would be a suggestion.
Mm-hmm. And with that, I'm not seeing any more questions, so I'm going to give a big thanks to our presenters today, to Dan, Amy, and Kayla. This was really informative, and remind everybody our next webinar is on Tuesday, September 10th at noon on electric vehicle technology. If you have any coworkers you'd like to share this webinar with, it is going to be posted on the Green New York website in about a week, so look for it there. And thanks again, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.